Hey everyone, welcome back to Literally Gladiators. My name is Reading with Tatiana. I'm one of the monthly contributors for 2023, and every month I will be doing a full review for a non-fiction read. Before I go into the review for my book this month, if you're watching this, I'll appreciate if you come check out my channel, Reading with Tatiana, and hit the subscribe button. And without further ado, today I'm reviewing Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown, and I gave this book a 3 out of 5. This book was published in 2013, and the genre I would put it in is definitely nonfiction, a bit of memoir, and definitely like a sports focused book. A bit about the author, Daniel James Brown. He is an American author and he studied English in university as well as in his master's. He eventually became a professor teaching at Stanford in writing, but now he is and he eventually became a technical writer and editor, but now he writes narrative nonfiction full time, which leads to this book, Boys in the Boat. I actually want to specify also like the subtitle of the book. I don't know if you call it that, where basically it's The Boys in the Boat, the true story of an American team's epic journey to win gold at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. So this is his third nonfiction narrative book, and I really enjoyed this one. I mean, I gave it a 3, but it was enjoyable. The first two, I didn't really enjoy, or the premise didn't sound interesting, so I'll probably skip. But his next one, the fourth one that came out back in 2021, does sound promising. It's called Facing the Mountain, a true story of Japanese American heroes in World War II. So I think it is kind of neat that he seems to pick a topic that I assume that he's personally interested in or had the opportunity to interview people to have a narrative. And I think that's cool, like, he dedicates his life to that, because there are lots of stories out there that are worth sharing, but not everyone has the tools or the capacity to share that story. So I think that's pretty neat. The premise and the story of this book. So one thing I really appreciate about this book is there is like a glossary and pictures of all the team members and all the, I guess, like people that was in the main protagonist Joe Rand's life. And also throughout the book, there's also lots of pictures of like the settings of the team members. So it's really cool, and I really like how that book was set up. So the premise of this book is basically we meet the boys who made the Olympic team to represent America in the rowing race at the Berlin Olympics, which is in 1936, which is also known as like Hitler's Olympics. And it's really a triumphant story of like how these 9 boys on his team, they went to University of Washington, and back then there's also during the Great Depression. And I think back then there was kind of like a classified America where like people in the eastern side were people of class and privilege, of old money, where people in the west, like in Seattle, Washington State, they were people who, yes, they went to university, but they had to work really hard to get there. They were from like labor jobs, blue collar, and they really struggled to make their way to university. So we meet Joe, who is, even though it features or showcases the whole team, it really just focuses Joe's story, because I think how the author came to write about the story was he interviewed Joe Rant. And so basically Joe, he grew up, and I think his mom died or something, and then his dad left him to be raised by an aunt in a different city at like a very young age. And then his dad remarried and brought Joe back to his life. But then like in high school, after the dad and the stepmom had their own kids during the Great Depression, they just couldn't feed so many mouths, and they acknowledged that Joe is big enough to take care of himself. So he basically just left Joe in this house and abandoned him, and Joe basically raised himself. And he was, I think, like very good at school. So he had the opportunity to go to university, but he had to take a year in between, like a gap year, to work really hard so he could save to go to university. And then basically the stories about Joe making something of himself against all odds, and about the people that supported him, like his girlfriend, eventually his wife, his coaches, his teammates, and it's really just like a true underdog story. And then eventually, like, I don't think I'm spoiling the book because it's in like the title of the book, is these boys, they come against all odds to become his team at the university. They row and then ultimately become the team to represent America in the Olympics, and they win gold. So this book is like very like, oh, you're really cheering for these people. It's a really, really uplifting read. Common themes I found for this book, which is probably no surprise, is perseverance. It's a timeless story of trying and succeeding, but sometimes failing, but still trying again, overcoming adversity, and just, being part of a team. And I hope everyone gets to experience in their life where they get to become part of something, even if it's temporary, where you feel like there's so many individuals coming together to be one single working like almost like organism. Because the boys really experience this in the boat when they're all like rowing in sync together, which is like really really neat. I did give this book a 3 out of 5, so there are a few things I didn't like. The one big thing I didn't like that really took away from the book is I do appreciate him focusing on Joe because he probably interviewed Joe and had the most backstory for Joe. But I felt like because it's called The Boys in the Boat, I wish there was more profiling of each of the boys who were also teammates of Joe and also of the coaches and more backstory, so it'd be a more fleshed out book. I felt this book just felt short in terms of storytelling when I wanted to show the success of this Olympic team. And then, of course, things that I did like is I love Joe's story and his upbringing. It was a great slice of life into what it was like living during the Great Depression. It was my first time reading anything that's kind of set during a time period. And, just the glance at what life is back then in America, because I honestly had no idea. I just love reading these like nonfiction memoirs or even like historical fiction where you really get like a taste of what it was like to live back then. On Goodreads, this book got a very high rating at 4.37 out of 5. I'll start, as always, with my bad reviews. I do want to say that less than 12% of reviewers gave it 3 stars or lower, so lots of people really, really enjoyed this book. So bad reviews were similar to me. It was a solid book, a good story, but it just didn't wow me. I felt like it was lacking in terms of like different characters being profiled. And people felt like I don't agree with this, but people felt it was kind of slow and the writing was kind of boring. I can see that because they do go into detail describing each race in the rowing competitions, but I understand why they do that because they're trying to like build up like anticipation and like climax and that kind of stuff. But I can see why people didn't enjoy that. However, people like me who didn't enjoy this reading this book do agree that I think this will be a great movie adaptation. And from what I read online is that there is a movie adaptation that's being worked on in like George Clooney's production company, which I think will be really cool because I do think this book will be a very great movie action sports movie. And then the flip side is good reviews is people that weren't into rowing before really appreciate the writing style and how they got into rowing. And they also thought that even though you know the outcome that they win the gold medal at the Berlin Olympics, that you still get sucked into and drawn into the story of these boys in the boat. I also think another reason why people really ranked it high is, and maybe because I'm Canadian, is I'm not American, so I feel a lot of people were very proud of this book, and maybe they've had like older relatives that lived during this era of the Great Depression. And I think everyone just needs a good story sometimes. But for me as a Canadian, not that I couldn't relate to this book because obviously I can appreciate the struggle that the boys went through, but I guess not being American, I just didn't have that like I guess like that patriotism of this team, if that makes sense. But I can see why Americans would really enjoy this book. Why I think you should read this book? I think you should read this book if you love a good underdog story of the working class people during the Great Depression in America. I also think you should read it if you're an Olympics fan or if you're also an American that's really proud to be American and wants to read about these underdog stories. Because isn't that what like being American's all about? Now I'll share how this book made me feel because if you ask me a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly what this book was about, but I'll also remember how it made me feel. So after reading this book, it made me feel very inspired. This book really shows that, like Joe, no matter your upbringing or your circumstances, you can always work hard to try to make something of your life. Maybe you won't be as successful as Joe, maybe you'll fail, but there's always the inspiration to try. And the only thing that can be certain is change. So why not give it a shot? Thank you for watching until the end of my book review for Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown. If you read this book, let me know what you thought in the comments down below.